I'm going to start now. Welcome to everyone who is with us today. This is the Parenting Beyond Bars webinar/conversation with Chesa Boudin. Thank you, Mr. Boudin, for accepting the invite today. And to each one of you guys who are here, my name is Ivana. I work for Legal Services for Prisoners with Children as a Family Unity Matters coordinator and the coordinator for the Coalition for Family Unity. The coalition started back in October of last year, 2020. It is composed of 26 nonprofit organizations, all system and directly impacted. We got together and drafted AB 990, who is now going to make visit a right instead of a privilege. We're all, like I said, system and directly impacted families and organizations fighting the barriers and challenges that prevent family reunification with incarcerated loved ones and their families outside. AB 990 is going to give the right to visit instead of a privilege for families of incarcerated loved ones and restore the votes for incarcerated individuals, among other things. Without further ado, and we don't want to take too much time, I'm going to give our mic to Mr. Chesa Boudin, who's here with us. He's going to be moderating the conversation and introducing our panelists. Mr. Chesa, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Ivana, and thank you all for joining us today, and a special thanks to the other panelists here. This is a critical issue. It's a critical issue when it comes to our values as a community, our values as families, and it's a critical issue when it comes to public safety. You know, as you heard, my name is Chesa Boudin, and I'm the district attorney of the city and county of San Francisco. But like so many millions of Americans, I also grew up with incarcerated parents. When I was a baby, no more than a year old, 14 months, my parents left me at the babysitter. They planned to pick me up at the end of the day, but they committed an armed robbery. They were driving a getaway car, and the robbery went terribly, terribly wrong. A security guard got killed. 2 police officers got shot and killed. My parents got arrested, and they never came to pick me up at the babysitter. My mother ended up serving 22 years in prison. My father was given a 75-year minimum sentence. He's now been incarcerated 39 years, and he may never get out. I don't remember that day. I don't remember getting picked up by friends and family from the babysitter when my parents' arrest was on the news. My earliest memories, like so many millions of American children, are going through steel gates, getting searched at metal detectors, just to be able to get into a prison visiting room to see my parents, to give them a hug, to touch them, to hear them tell me they love me. And one of the things I noticed at a very early age was that the prison visiting rooms were filled with visitors that were mostly Black and brown women and children. There is a horrific racial disparity in which families are impacted by incarceration. There's a devastating impact on families and entire communities that are torn apart because of our country's desire to punish without regard to the collateral consequences of the children left behind. And over the years growing up in prison visiting rooms, I was really lucky, luckier than most, because I was able to travel long distances to visit my parents, sometimes hundreds of miles, because I was able to accept expensive collect phone calls to be able to maintain contact. And not all families have the resources or the ability to maintain contact and to build relationships from the distance that incarceration creates. Not all parents who are incarcerated have the ability to pay for stamps or to be able to get access to visitation. But those are critical things that allow us, children left behind, children who have committed no crime, who have a right to a relationship with our parents, who have a right to get to know the people who brought us into the world, even if they've made mistakes, serious mistakes. But the way we respond and the way we treat people who commit crimes punishes the children and the families left behind as well. And this bill will help change that. This bill will help break an intergenerational cycle of incarceration so that we don't condemn children whose parents are incarcerated to themselves end up incarcerated, so that we don't punish people who are totally innocent of any crime because of something another person in their family did or was convicted of doing. This is about bringing our criminal justice system and our approach to punishment into sync with our values around family integrity and family unity. This is about recognizing that we cannot continue to create new victims. And that when we do that, we're actually undermining public safety, not just for the families left behind, but also because of the ways that impacts decisions that we all make. Too many of the young people I grew up in prison visiting rooms with, visiting our parents themselves, ended up incarcerated. It didn't need to be that way. We can break this cycle. We can break this cycle and we can support children and we can support families. But to do it, we have to recognize the full humanity of everybody in our community, including those who have committed crimes and the families that are left behind when we send them to prison. This bill will create critical programming and access to visitation and maintenance of family unity, which should be and must be a priority for all of us. I'm really proud to be able to be here today simply to moderate and to help give voice to our other panelists. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, ask them to say a few words about themselves. And I'm just going to go in order, in the order of folks on my screen. So if I could start with you, Lisa, if you could unmute yourself and please introduce yourself, and I'm going to work my way around the screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Boudin. My name is Lisa Gregory. I am a program manager for one family that works in the San Francisco jail system, facilitates visits between incarcerated parents and their children. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and lend my voice to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And just moving over in the screen, Karen, you're next.
Sure. Good afternoon, DA Boudin. I'm Karen McDaniel. I am the executive director and the founder of the Place for Grace, and we serve children and families of incarcerated parents at 17 prisons throughout California through our literacy program and through our Camp Grace program. In addition, my family is directly impacted in that my children have a father who's been incarcerated their entire life. So we have spent a great many years visiting California prisons. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Karen. Moving on, Angela, you're up next.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Angela Birts. I am the founder and CEO of Birts Equity and Inclusion Solutions, which offers diversity consulting to schools, organizations, and nonprofits. And I'm a lecturer at UC Santa Cruz. I am the daughter of Ali Birts, who spent 18 years serving a 36 to years life prison sentence from my early childhood up until my mid-20s. And very grateful to be here today and be a part of the panel with all of you.
Thank you so much. And moving on to Ali.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Willard Ali Birts. I'm the senior organizer for All of Us and None, the Oakland National Chapter. I'm part of the Alameda County Participatory Defense Hub, and I'm a part of the Family Unity Matter here, and the Family Visiting Team, and it's a pleasure to be here. I took some time off my vacation today to make sure that I can be a participant in this and see what we can do to assist other families that went through some of the things that me and my family went through. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, especially for interrupting your vacation. Appreciate that. Moving on to James.
We have to James, Mr. DA.
I'm sorry, James. I'm sorry about that.
As
James
well as
Morrison.
we have two Angelas as well.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Go ahead, James Morrison, please.
How you doing? My name is James Morrison. I was formerly incarcerated. I served 24 and a half years on a 15 to life sentence. I work for a nonprofit organization called Urban Alchemy on the LA Street Clean team. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you for that, James Morrison. And now moving on to Eric Morrison.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Morrison Smith. I'm with the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color and Pulse Link, and work on a variety of policy issues related to public safety and criminal legal system. And I am the son of James Morrison. I'm sure y'all could tell because we look just alike.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now let's move on to other James McDaniel.
Hello, my name is James McDaniel. I'm 16 years old, and I have an incarcerated father that I've been seeing my whole life throughout California. And I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Now, Angela, our second Angela.
Hi, my name's Angela Hedlin. I'm 18. My dad's been in prison for pretty much my whole life, and I'm just glad to be here to be able to share my experiences with other people who went through the same thing as I did.
Thank you so much, Angela. And last but certainly not least, Norma.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. I'm formerly incarcerated. I spent 18 years of a 19-year to life sentence incarcerated. When I started my journey, I was a young, pregnant, soon-to-be mom. And my son visited me in the visiting room at CIW for many years. And I'm happy to be here and to talk about our experiences. So thank you.
Thank you, Norma. And thank you all for sharing and for being willing to share your experience. I know from my own life experience that, one of the things that's particularly challenging about having parents incarcerated is the stigma and the ways in which society teaches us that it somehow reflects badly on us, as though we did something wrong, and it's something that we're supposed to be ashamed of. And I know breaking through that stigma and having the courage to step up and say, you know what, we're actually in the majority. I didn't learn until I was an adult that the majority of American adults have an immediate family member who is currently or formerly incarcerated. So all of us, even though sometimes we feel alone or we feel isolated or stigmatized, the truth is our experience is the norm in this country. And that's something we need to change, but it's also something that we need to make the public aware of so we can break through this stigma. And so with that, I want to ask the kids or folks who grew up as kids visiting their parents to weigh in on what that experience was like, what some of the challenges were, what were the difficulties of having to visit parents behind bars, and what are some of the things that might have made it easier, and what are the things that still hurt today? So any of the kids who have thoughts about that, please feel free to share. Now, I say kids knowing you're all adults now, but
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I'm one of the big kids. I'm 28 now, but totally get it. I think that for me, there's a variety of things that were extremely difficult that I'm still trying to process and work through. But I think one of the things that I struggled with the most was just the fact that I wasn't in proximity to my father for most of his incarceration. He was incarcerated when I was 2. And between 2 and 8, he was at Donovan, which was about 20 minutes from where my mom lived. But after that, he actually got moved to Central California and Northern California, which was, a 6 to 10 hour drive and a full weekend trip if we wanted to go see him. And I think that, that weighed on me just because I wasn't able to see my father as much as I would have liked to, and wasn't able to be in close proximity to him. And him and I haven't talked about all of this, so some of this is going to be first time for him hearing this as well. But it was really difficult to build that deep bond because most of our relationship was through letters and phone calls, and some of that was great. My father has beautiful handwriting, the best cursive writing I've ever seen in my entire life. But the things that I really remembered, and the things that I think that I really craved for as a kid was the things that I got when he was at Donovan and when I was able to go visit him more frequently. I remembered him, I was smaller. I wasn't 220 pounds that I am now, but back then he used to pick me up and put me on his lap, and he used to give me kisses on my face, and he used to call me boo and little man. And for much of my life, those were the things that I craved and wasn't able to get because for whatever reason, the system decided that my father should be 8 to 10 hours away from his family. So as it relates to this bill, I think that that's one of the things that I really struggle with most. And then the one last thing that I'll say is that I think that my mom, who did an amazing job raising me, and I love her to death. But one of the things that I frequently remember her telling me is that she wants to find me a Black mentor. And I think it's because she saw how much I was struggling to figure it out as it's hard to be Black in America. It's even hard to be a Black boy in America with an incarcerated father. And I think that she constantly saw that I needed a Black mentor, and just, it was difficult to find. But in the reality, I didn't need a Black mentor. Black mentors are great, but the thing that I really needed was my father in my life. And because he was so far away, I didn't necessarily have him in the way that I needed him.
That's real, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. Any of the other folks who grew up as kids visiting incarcerated parents who have something to add to what Eric just shared?
I could add something to that. Like he said, like, well, I don't remember his name, my bad. Like he said, it was being super far away from my father, not being able to see him every single day of my life. That really sucked. The long car rides, that really sucked. And staying in hotels, that was the worst part for me, staying in a hotel and having to wake up in the morning and go see my father.
I can definitely relate to that, James. I know that something about those hotels, it doesn't feel like vacation at all. It feels cold and lonely and empty. And you got to leave the prison after the visit, turn your back on someone you love, hear those steel gates close behind you, and then go stay in a place that's not even home, right? And do it all again the next day. It's hard. It's really hard. Any other folks want to weigh in? Angela, Ali, other folks want to weigh in on this experience?
So sure, I actually did not visit my father while he was incarcerated when I was younger. I didn't go for the first time until I was in my mid-20s. And so that was more so, that was my mom's choice not to have me go. I don't really have any feelings about that part of it, but I do recall my first time driving to Salinas Valley State Prison. And I actually wasn't even permitted to go inside because they were on lockdown. And I just remember I had built up the courage, and I had a friend in school that drove, a cousin actually, that went out there with me. So to be shut down, it was really discouraging because that wasn't information that I knew what happened when I made it there. So I drove all the way there. I didn't get turned down right away, actually. I was told that my clothing weren't appropriate or didn't fit the standards, which to this day, I don't understand why that was the case. I mean, I put on baggy pants. I made sure, you can't have the bra with the wire in it. I didn't have that. So I really do not understand why I had to be sent to that house to change my clothes. So I went through that process. And then to go through all of that 2 hours later to go back and then be told that that the unit was actually on lockdown, that it was intense. It was really intense for me. And I think I didn't end up going back until a few months later when I was finally able to see him. For me personally, I prefer the maintaining the communication with my father through the phone or writing letters. But to this day, I'm not really fond of going through that visiting process. The only thing that was helpful for me was seeing other people that were in my situation. And especially when like I would be in line and see young girls and young boys, I felt that the situation I was going through was bigger than myself. And so I was able to try to, make them smile, ask them how they're doing in school, because I know what it's like to be a child in that situation. That's the thing that I gained, of course, seeing my dad, but more than that, it was also recognizing just, the humanity of it all and being around people who were going through that same experience. But the process itself, I don't like it. And I don't necessarily know if I'm an advocate for kids going, to be honest, based on how I feel as an adult, but I respect any decision that a parent would make. But I would say having someone for them to process that experience with is important because it's traumatic to go through that.
And let me just popcorn off that real quick, Angela, before I invite Angela Hedlin to join in and share her experience as well. For me, the difference between my mother's prison visiting room and my father's prison visiting room was night and day. And, I absolutely appreciate, that concern that you're raising about, is it even a good idea to visit? And, for me, I know that we can create visiting environments that are child friendly. I know that we can create visiting experiences and prison entry procedures that aren't traumatic for kids. If we really care about kids, if we really care about families and the next generation, we have models out there for how we can do it in ways that are humane. And this law is going to help us create those models, not just in 1 or 2 prisons, but as a right for everybody who's impacted by incarceration. Angela Hedlin, did you want to weigh in as well?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say for me, it was also the long drives, but it was also having to just go through that long drive just to see him through the glass, and having such restricted contact with my dad was just completely normalized for me as a child. So yeah, so over the years, I feel like just making things easier for me growing up would have been just more, I don't know how to put it into words, but just getting to know him more as a parent through more than just conversation. So that physical contact would have definitely helped in terms of like how I felt and how children would feel like about the situation in general.
Thank you for that, Angela. Yeah, it's really hard as a kid, right, to sit across a big table in a loud prison visiting room with somebody that, you know, you've been separated from. You maybe, as Angela Birch shared, we haven't seen them in years. And to try to build a relationship and rebuild trust that's been damaged by incarceration, and do that in a cold, loud prison visiting room environment with no toys, that's not a normal way for kids to relate to their parents anyway. And you add in the complicated trauma and emotion of incarceration. We need environments that foster healing and love and communication, not that add to the trauma. Let me invite the parents to weigh in and kind of share your experience from the other side here. What was the most difficult part of keeping in touch with your child? And how did prison visits impact that bond and the ability to rebuild the bond? Did it affect your mental health at all? And just share a little bit about that experience of trying to be a parent from the distance that incarceration created.
I can go. So like I said earlier, first of all, it was really great hearing from the kids here on this panel. It's just making my heart really whole right now to hear these kids talk so openly and so freely about their experiences. When I was first incarcerated, I had so much shame and I had so much guilt. Like, I looked at my son's life and I said, what have I done? Like, what have I done to this poor child? What can I do? And one of the first things that I was able to do, because I had a community there, a community of women who are incarcerated, who some in this world would say are the worst of the worst, who were my mentors and who were my strength. And they told me, you can make a difference. None of us were going home at that time. All of us with life sentences were there for 20, 30 years. No hope in sight back then. This is the 90s, nothing. And they said, you can make a difference in the life of this child. One person can make a difference. And so what I did is I got some services. I went and I quit my high paying job of $50 an hour. No, not an hour, a month. And I went to a lower paying job in the mental health department so that I could get services, so that I could figure out how to parent my son. And what that did for us, it helped me to be honest with him and to try to build this relationship. A couple things that were really hard were the stigma, like you had talked about earlier. There's this huge stigma that I was constantly working against about, you know, these ladies in the visiting room that love you are good people, but they've made mistakes, against, you know, society saying, throw those people away. So that was like our constant struggle. And then, but also on the positive side, my son learned at an early age to see a whole person, to see people, to see this community of people who perhaps made mistakes, but look how they come together for my mama. Look how these ladies come together for me and send me, you know, birthday cards and birthday gifts that they handmade. So there was also this positive element that came from that support system of the women inside prison. So thank you.
Thank you, Norma. Others want to share their experience of what it was like to parent from the inside?
Yeah, this is Ali. I'll go first. Well, first of all, this last time I received 32 years of life in 96, and Angela might have been about 9 years old. That wasn't her first time having to staying in contact with me. Like she said before, I remember receiving a letter from her when she was 7 years old, when I was serving another sentence before I had a life sentence. So I've always had a communication line with her mother, who I could write letters, send them there. I knew my daughter would get the mail, and she started reading them and writing them on her own. But this last time, when I had received a life sentence, I'd been to prison quite a few times, and I was always classified as a level 4. And being in these maximum security prisons, whether it was Salinas Valley, New Folsom, Sacramento, Corcoran, it doesn't make a difference. The problem for me was there's a lot of gang violence in there. I wasn't in any gang. I might have been in something they considered a disruptive group. And so when they start locking people down that is engaged in this type of behavior with other individuals in there, and you're not a part of that, and then when your family's driving 200 or 300 miles or whatever the distance and putting up in hotels, whatever they had to go through gas, and they told they can't come in because you're on lockdown. So I felt that now you punishing me because of my race. You punishing me because of my race. Some other individuals got caught up in here and something had nothing to do with me. So that's very frustrating. I should wake up mad every day in prison for a lot of years. And my main concern was trying to stay alive and not get caught up while I end up having to hurt somebody in here and do something and end up with some more time. And at the time, the last time, I believe in the 90s, where I'm from, my community where my daughter was living, East Palo Alto, was the murder capital. It was very violent out there. It's a small community, 2.5 miles. And so, you know, just listening to the news and reading stuff in the paper, I was always upset, you know, not at ease that, you know, this is a dangerous place. I was lucky that her mother, you know, got married, you know, get with somebody that was more, you know, responsible, and they moved out of that community and moved somewhere else, you know, to raise a family. And that kind of gave me a little relief that they were able, you know, to start life somewhere else. So, when you're in these level 4s, there's a lot of psychological mind games that play with you by holding your mail, you know, and your family is saying, well, I didn't written him, I didn't get, or her, how come I haven't gotten a response? A lot of this stuff is designed to destroy your family structure. So like my daughter explained, probably a few other people coming up there to be searched or told that their clothes doesn't fit the criteria. When we all send the Title 15 rules, the visiting procedures, we've sent all this type of information home ahead of time to our families. And I remember when I might have been around 2008 or 9, being in Salinas Valley, one of my cells was I could see the parking lot. And I'm watching every week, mostly people of color, you know, not just Blacks, Latinos, or whatever, Asian people, family members being turned around, women changing clothes in the parking lot. Some of them had to get to the point where they had to bring a couple of 2 or 3 different outfits with them. So if they got turned away, nobody wants to go to the friends outside and put on some clothes that look like they came from the Goodwill or somebody else been wearing, and they use them. You don't know if they're clean. Nobody's family member wants to go through that. But I imagine many of them have, just because they wanted to come in to see their loved one, that they had to go through some type of sacrifices. So that's the difficult part, is having people that's not compassionate, that work in some of these facilities, that try to degrade and dehumanize you as an individual. It also affects your family. And so that first visit, after about 16 years, 17 years, to see my daughter, a grown woman, come visit me, we got written many letters. It could be a book, a lot of stuff we talked about. But to see her the first time, and I'm in a Salinas Valley, and they had what they call sensitive need in custody people on this yard, they were able to have a contact visit in the visiting room. I had waist chains on, coming into the visiting room, and leg irons behind a glass, like I was still in a county facility after 17 years to receive my first visit. It really bothered me what my daughter had to see me like that, and I'm trying to imagine what she had to go through other than what she written and explained to me and what I'm hearing now. So she came back up the following week. We had first contact visit. We were able to embrace each other, you know, hug each other for a few seconds, a kiss. You know, that meant a lot to me. You know, my daughter, over a lot of years, I spent locked down 24 hours a day in maximum security prison. A letter, a card, a picture, it means a lot. So I had to watch my daughter grow up by looking at photos. I have all those photos now, and all the different places she traveled through her, you know, education and leaving the country, going to different places. was very painful. And, you know, I came to understand that I started seeing people coming to prison in their 20s, my age, like when I started in 1978, you know, and it kind of they showed me how crazy and ignorant I was.
Yeah, and Ali, I want to just thank you for sharing and opening up. You've come so far, and you know, hearing you and Angela be able to share things with each other that you haven't shared, you know, with you know, with each other in the past in this space is really powerful. And I just want to thank both of you, and I want to make space for some of the other parents to share their experiences as well.
I respect that. I respect that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do some of the other parents who were in want to also share their experience?
Hi. Yeah, for me, I can relate to some of the things that both Norma and Ali shared. On one hand, like for me as a parent, you know, I went to prison when I was 21 years old. It was my first time being incarcerated. Like Ali said, you know, the prison life is permeated with gang politics and stuff like that. So I'm being introduced to a lot of things that I'm not familiar with, and having to learn how to navigate that. But at the same time, as a young father, growing up without my father, I also kind of understood the predicament that I left my son in. So for me, one of the hardest things is I'm still young. I'm trying to learn how to develop and understand my own identity while trying to deal with the shame and the guilt from the bad decisions that I made, and trying to figure out how to have something of substance to give my son, you know. And I remember like when I first went to prison, I think I was first went to the CDC system in '96. I think that they had a rule back then to where supposedly you weren't supposed to be housed any further than 250 miles from the, you know, the county or the city to which you committed your felony, or where your family was housed at. And for 19 of the 24 years, I was like housed at least a 6 to 7 hour drive from there. So that was a struggle for like, from the age of my son was 8 up until 18. It was like a 10-year span where we had no physical contact at all. You know, so you got to try to build this bond with your child that you love unconditionally, with having no physical contact with them. And it's very difficult to do that through letters and stuff like that. But by the grace of God, and with a lot of the support and efforts from his mother, we were able to make contact. I was able to learn and stuff like that, so that when we did finally have an opportunity to bond even more, I had something of substance, I believe, to give him. So thank you for sharing, allowing me to share.
Thank you for sharing that, James. Any others want to weigh in? I know we have other questions as well. So if you know, if folks want to share other experiences from what it was like to parent on the inside, feel free to jump in now. Let me ask a slightly different question then. You know, I'm really curious. We've just begun to scratch the surface of the experience that I know all of us as kids growing up with incarcerated parents had, and also what it was like to parent from the inside. I know we could take a lot of time and continue to talk about that, but you know, we're here today also to talk about this exciting new bill, AB 990, and why it's important. And so one of the questions that I want to just open up for everybody, whether you grew up as a kid visiting or whether you had to learn to parent from within prison, Why do you think that AB 990 is so important? And how do you expect that it would, if it becomes law, that would help you or other families who are confronting the challenges that you experience that we've been talking about today? This for anyone.
I'll go. So I think AB 990 is incredibly important to bring our communities together. I think too often people think of folks in prison as them versus us. And we need to look at people in prison as our community, and the children of those incarcerated also as our community, and how we would treat our family. In prison as it currently is, that visiting is a privilege. So that means it's very easy to get what we call a 115, which is like a ticket or in trouble when you're incarcerated. And because visiting is a privilege, those are often yanked away from people for any kind of minor things happening. And also, there's not a lot of weight given to the time that people spend in visiting. When I was first incarcerated in the early 90s, there were 4 days of visiting. And that really saved mine and my son's life and our relationship, that he was able to come on a Thursday night, he was able to come on a Friday day. And there were a lot of grandmas there because it was not as a busy day. And so we need to really start bringing some of those concepts back into the prison system to support people who are incarcerated, who are struggling just like I was, James and Ali. We were struggling to have this work on ourselves, but also bring our children in and raise our children to be good people.
Thank you for that, Norma. Yeah, do others want to weigh in on AB 990 and how it would help?
Yes, this is Ali. It's very important that families stay connected. And I believe that families members, whether they're your children, your spouse, or whoever, they shouldn't be punished for something that an individual has got caught up in. And it is a good way of rehabilitation to keep connected to a family member. We can learn from each other. I learned that, I was trying to say earlier when we was running out of time, we'll make it real brief. When I started seeing younger people coming in my age, I would try to explain to them, if they had children, that once we bring a life into the world, that's a responsibility. We need to stop doing certain things and getting engaged in certain behavior as an excuse because we have lack of education, a lack of knowledge of ourselves, and we resort to anything and everything that we know that's not always right, and then we get caught up in the system. So my thing is that if this bill passed, it could give a bridge for families to stay connected. So if they're not doing life or life without, and they ever do get released, they still can have a connection with their family, with the child, as they become older, to give them a full understanding of the mistakes they made so they can learn from that. I believe my daughter learned certain things from me, just like I learned from her. They inspired her to want to go to school, get an education. She made sacrifices not to run the street, party, hang around certain type of people. She knows what that's all about. And for me sharing information in these long letters, being an honest person with my daughter about what I was doing, how I was doing, and why I was doing it, I believe it opened her eyes up. And then from watching her becoming a little girl to a grown woman, writing these letters to me that sometimes I had to look in the dictionary to see what she's talking about, because she's a very diverse young lady that's been, a world traveler. So that made me want to change my life in a major way, to say, how can I give somebody instructions and tell them to do something that I'm not doing it myself? I have to lead by an example, and so the mistakes that I made, some of those could be corrected. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to have my life sentence overturned with a video they watched through the social department and 3-strike committee. And by her telling them how she really seen the change in me from what she told them in this video, they let me out the next day with no parole, not anything. So that was a blessing itself. So that was my ticket right there. My daughter staying connected. It wasn't just for me, it was for both of us. And let me stop right here and let somebody else, because I might take over.
Thank you, Ali. Always good to make space for other folks. Anybody else want to weigh in and follow up on that? Yeah, go ahead, Lisa. I see you.
Thank you. I just want to speak to the necessity of AB 990 from a different perspective. Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, I've got a 3-year-old in the background, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, the reasons that we're here today. The number of children with parents in prison increased by 80% between 91 and 2007. Okay, just a minute. Apologize. The program that I run in San Francisco is incredibly important because what we do is we facilitate in-person visits for parents with their children. The need for children to have that connection with their parents is vital because strong families and that strong family connection avoids many of the pitfalls and the generational cycles that we have encountered here, which is taxing our monies quite extensively. It would be much more relevant and fiscally responsible to address these problems, which is allowing parents to visit with their children, guaranteeing that as a right, not a privilege. These children need their parents. We have inequities in 1 in 15 Black children, 1 in 42 Latino children have an incarcerated parent, 1 in 111 white children. That's a problem. These children need access to their parents so that they can be successful, and those parents need that connection with their children. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Lisa.
And I apologize for all the background noise.
Not at all. Families and kids are what we're here to talk about. That's part of life. Whether someone's incarcerated, whether someone's on a Zoom panel, we know that's a reality, and we got to stop pretending that just because someone has been sent to prison or because they have professional responsibilities that they don't also have family obligations, right? That's real, and that's what this is all about. So nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to apologize for.
Yeah, and
Eric, I see you, Eric, and then we'll go to Karen.
Okay, all right, sounds good. And I'll keep mine pretty brief, but just the one thing that I know will help out with immediately is keeping families closer together. Like me and my pops and others have already shared that the way that the system is currently, it keeps us disconnected from our loved ones and puts them miles away. So I think that this bill will automatically support with that piece. And then the other piece that I think that is important for all this is that having an incarcerated loved one is extremely expensive, whether you're paying for the phone calls or just even making the trips, right? You got to worry about, because you want to get up there early in the morning. So you're typically going to leave the night before, which means you have to get a motel or hotel. I know we stayed in some motels. And then you got to worry about dinner that night. You got to worry about breakfast, transportation, all these different things. One of the things that this bill also supports with is some financial assistance. I don't think that this should be a transactional process where you have to have financial wealth to be able to see your loved one who's incarcerated. So that's just another thing that I wanted to highlight, because I think that that's critical. And knowing that my mom worked 2 to 3 jobs, basically my entire life, we shouldn't have to struggle to go see my father.
That's real. Yeah, the expense and the financial and geographic burdens are real, and that's something that this bill would address and try to level the playing field so that even if you do have to go through prison security procedures, it's not so traumatic, it's not so expensive, and it's not so time consuming. Karen, I know you were next.
Yeah, thank you. I think many of the panelists, and thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and being so brave and really, I think, voicing your pain to power. So many people highlighted many of the things that I often say, think, etc. But I wanted to pull a few pieces together. Chesa, you really talked about this intergenerational cycle of incarceration, right? And that is simply because parental incarceration is an ACE, is an adverse childhood experience, right? As serious as losing a parent to death, etc. And it is one that we don't talk about because of the shame that many of the panelists have expressed, right? Parents who've been incarcerated carry tremendous shame. Children who've had incarcerated parents or do have incarcerated parents carry tremendous shame. So this is like the unspoken trauma that many of us don't speak about. And yet, in this state, since 2003, there has been a Bill of Rights for children of incarcerated parents. And one of the core rights in that bill says children have a right to touch their incarcerated parent. And yet there's no teeth in that bill, because the kids here today consistently told you that the separation that was caused by their parents' incarceration is one of the things that most deeply hurt them, right? Not being able to get to and touch their parent. James, not my James, the 16-year-old James, but James, the father, James, father of Eric, expressed that he and his son went more than 10 years at one point without physically touching. There is nothing that can replace the physical touch of a parent. Angela expressed that even though she was able to go see her dad, Brian, inside, that many times it was behind glass. A child should never, ever be punished because of an infraction that their parent had inside of a prison. To put a parent and a child and a glass in between them, talk about cruel and unusual punishment. Our children are already treated like they have committed the crime of their parent. That punishment cannot be continued inside the visiting room. AB 990 would make it so that children would not be forced to see their parents with a glass barrier between them, so that no infant or toddler would ever bang on glass in the state of California again, trying to get to their parent. I will never forget my children trying to share the handheld, telephone that you are relegated to use when your loved one is behind glass. How do you share that? How do you shove all of your love into that hour behind the glass visit amongst little children and a mom? It's impossible, and it's dehumanizing and it's degrading. So AB 990 is needed for a variety of reasons. We must extend visiting hours and access. Eric, dude, I want to high five you. You said exactly what people need to hear. A lot of really well-meaning people like your mom want to get mentors for children of incarcerated parents.
Thank you, Karen. It looks like you might have frozen. I want to also open it up to
90 will allow greater access.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that. Really, really critical. And I want to just echo something as we open up for a question from the audience. If you're going to drive 8 hours, or if you're going to fly across the state and take time off work and have to stay in a hotel, and then you only get 3 hours of visiting, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. And so this is about recognizing that we need a minimum standard of access to family, a minimum standard of visitation that recognizes a child's right, constitutional right, to a relationship with their parents, no matter what their parents have been convicted of. When I was in law school, and this is going to tie into a question from Mickey Duxbury from the audience. When I was in law school, I did a research project comparing prison visitation in all 50 states. And we found some really horrendous things. We found a state that prohibited any language other than English from being spoken on visits. That was Utah. Now, we were able to get that policy changed with help from the ACLU. We found another state, it was New Hampshire, that prohibited any toys from being brought into the visiting room. Can you imagine? Prohibiting toys, right? And I could go on and on about some of the things we found. Now, we have an opportunity. We know there's tremendous variation from state to state and from prison to prison. And Mickey Duxbury is asking us which prisons in California have the worst visiting rooms so that we can apply pressure. And I want to open it up and ask folks to share their experiences, but I also want to emphasize, this is why we need AB 990, so that there is a minimum standard, that there's a threshold. You can't go below that in terms of access and quality of visitation. We need to set a high bar. AB 990 would do that, and it would ensure that you don't get punished more harshly as Ali was talking about, because your father or mother is in a higher security prison, right? We need a minimum standard. AB 990 does that. Can folks share a little bit about your experience with different prison visiting experiences and which ones were some of the worst here in California? I see lots of folks weighing in the chat, so we're getting answers from the experience of the audience as well. Ali already spoke to this a little bit. Anybody else want to share maybe a positive experience in contrast with the negative? I know, for example, growing up visiting my parents in New York, I was able to do overnight conjugal visits with my father, where I actually spent 48 hours at a time in the prison. And that sort of opportunity, we would cook meals together inside the prison wall. He would help me with my homework. We'd be able to throw a ball. Those sorts of experiences are what were required for us to build a relationship. And that's not available to most kids in most states, certainly not most kids in California visiting their parents, but it makes a huge difference. Those are the kinds of programs that not only decrease recidivism for folks on the inside, but also allow children to process that trauma that we've been talking about. Anyone want to share some of their experiences from good or bad visiting here in California?
Well, I'll touch something real quick. The lower the level, like 1, 2, or 3, the visiting is probably much better than it would be in a level 4 facility because they're more concerned about contraband and all that kind of stuff. I think what is difficult is the long lines that families have to wait outside to get processed, even though they have a set date and time to come. The time they has to go through to get them processed, it's a long wait. They need to straighten that out. And some of them may have areas for small children where they do have maybe a TV in there, some games or something. Like you say, it varies from one institution to another. Even though they all up under CDCR rules, each facility have their own set of in-house type of rules, the way they run things. And most of it has to do with training staff too, how to communicate with families coming in. That need to be worked on. You know what I mean? That need to be worked on, how they deal and communicate with people and respect them in the right way. So when they do come up, they get the right information they need and they don't feel like they're being harassed.
Right, we want to avoid, that's right, Ali, we want to avoid the experience that Angela had on that first visit, right? When you make that trip, you're already nervous, you're already traumatized, and then you have to go through the whole rigmarole about what clothes you're wearing, what clothes you're not wearing. I can tell you, I've gone when my mom got out and we went together for the first time to visit my father. My mom hadn't seen him in decades. She did 22 years. And we went the first time the three of us were together on a visit. And I have to watch the correctional officers telling my mom to take her bra off in front of them, and experiencing that for what? For what? Right? And the level of humiliation in front of family members, in front of other visitors lined up waiting, it's a constant part of visitation for all of us. I know we're tight on time, and I want to just ask one last question, and I want everyone to try to weigh in with their own personal answer, but please keep it tight so we get to hear from everyone. And I want to start with some folks we haven't heard from as much of, so I'm going to ask Angela Hedlin to start with this one. But if you could say one thing about AB 990 and why we should pass it into law to the legislature or to Governor Newsom, what would it be? Go ahead, Angela.
I would say just to consider the impact that it has on children's perspectives on their parents and overall just how they view life, because it affects the child's psychological attachment style to their parents and that overall bond. It's just having that deprivation of a bond with your parent, it affects how you view things in terms of relationships throughout your life as you grow up. And I understand that now because I'm 18 years old. So I've experienced that impact just throughout relationships in my life and stuff. So yeah, I would just ask them to consider that aspect of it.
Thank you so much, Angela Hedlin. Let me go over to you, James McDaniel.
I feel like AB 990 would really help a lot in the aspect of Yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know.
I hear you, James. There's a lot here. There's a lot. I feel that. I'm gonna pass it over to Karen. So I know you all have experienced this together. I know this is a shared experience. It's not just one side. This is a two-way street.
Yeah, I mean, I feel deeply for my son right now. It's been, wow, whew. It's been more than 2 years since he's been able to see his dad. So I think that is very heavy right now. I think that the passing of AB 990, if I could say something directly to the governor, to Secretary Allison, to the legislature, I would say that the job of CDCR apparently is to hold people accountable for wrongdoing. And I'd like all of us as a community to hold them accountable for the wrongdoing that is being done in the name of justice to our children. The trauma that's being caused to our children is wrong. Children need access to their parents, and we can't, in the name of justice, continue to traumatize and further harm children. Someone has to be accountable for this harm. And so the governor, CDCR, the legislature, our community, we have to do something different.
Thank you, Karen. Let me go over to Lisa. I know we're tight on time, so let's just try to keep our answers short. Lisa Gregory.
Just really quickly, I think AB 990 is an investment in our children's future. It's an investment in the future of these parents. And we need to support this bill. So I would say reducing trauma and addressing these harms, like Karen mentioned, is absolutely vital. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Ali.
Yes, AB 990, I think it'll be a good improvement, to keep the families connected together, you know what I mean? And learning from each other as time go on. Everybody wants to know who their mother, who their father is, or where they come from, something about them, and this will be a way, even though I have a friend, he has 4 sons, he got 5 years to life. The type of charge he has, he can't even have visits with him. And I know it's driving him crazy. So that needs to change. If it's not related to, the type of, visiting, it shouldn't be restricted like that. You got a situation where you may never go anywhere and they telling you you can't see your children or they can't see you. That needs to change.
Thank you, Ali. Angela Birts.
I would say AB 990 is important just to maintain a family unit. I mean, if I just think about my personal experience, part of my identity is knowing where I come from, and nobody can really give you that but your parent. So those visits, those phone calls, that's just not for the parent. It's for you to feel affirmed as a person, so you know who you are and learn from your parents' experience. So maintaining that family connection is one of the ways that you could make sure that you're allowing children to have an experience where they're growing up, where they don't have to be boggled down by adversity, but see that they actually could do things with themselves in their lives by having that connection with their loved one.
That's right. Thank you. Eric Morrison.
Yeah, the thing that I would just say to the governor is, I read that he wants to make reforms and cultural change to prisons to make them more focused on rehabilitation. And I think that this bill is a step in the right direction. It's going to keep families connected, and that is a rehabilitating process. So I think he should just support AB 990.
Thank you so much. James Morrison.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned when I was reading about the bill is some of the research or the background on it. And it talked about how the children are more emotionally healthy and stable when they have contact with their parents. And it's also an incentive for the parents to thrive and be more productive, not only in prison, but once they are released from prison, to be more healthy and productive citizens in society. And another thing, being that we understand that and we know that, one of the things that I also learned is that only 10% of the incarcerated people in California actually receive visits, but yet the recidivism rate in California is close to 70%. So I think that the passing of this bill would possibly create opportunities for more healthy relationships that can actually help bring down the recidivism rate as well.
Thank you for that, James. Thank you. And Norma.
I would say to the governor to look at this panel here today and look at these beautiful kids and these beautiful family members, and to support us, the formerly incarcerated and the incarcerated, to rebuild our families.
Thank you. And I'm going to take one last word myself on this question, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Ivana to wrap up, trying to keep us as close to on schedule as possible, really respect people's time and appreciate you all sticking with us. I want to echo something that James and a couple others said. Look, even if you don't care, even if you're not moved by the trauma, if you don't care about the kids, if you don't care about the fact that there are more children in this country with a parent behind bars than there are people in prison, you don't care about the kids. If all you care about is public safety and law and order, I'm standing before you as San Francisco's district attorney. I am proud to serve the people of the city and county of San Francisco. I am honored to have the responsibility of promoting public safety. And I am begging you to sign this bill, to vote yes on this bill, to make it law, because it will make all of us safer. It will build safety. It will break the intergenerational cycle of incarceration. It will prevent trauma, and it will build community safety through family integrity and unity in ways that we all know. If we've benefited from love from a parent, we know how critical that is, and we know that that prevents future crimes. So please join us. Please join this movement that respects children and that respects families. And let's make this law. Let's lead the country in showing that we respect children and we uplift them and we want to heal and hold and love them. We can do it, California. Sign this law. Ivana, over to you.
Thank you, Chesa. I don't think I can add anything to your words, and I don't want to add anything to it, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for all the panelists. Thank you, Chesa, for taking this time to be here with us and supporting AB 990. I hope the government is listening to this and looking at this beautiful panel, these children that need their parents. Thank you all for listening through Facebook and the people who joined this webinar. Thank you all. God bless you all, and let's push for AB 990. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and let's pass AB 990. God bless you all. Have a great day. Thank you very much.